Yeah, my pleasure. I know you've been taking a close look at S-773, the Cybersecurity Act of 2009, which was introduced on April 1st to the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation by two moderate senators, Democrat John Rockefeller and Republican Olympia Snowe. As I understand it, the bill draws heavily from a report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which says, and this is a quote from their report from late 2008, America's failure to protect cyberspace is one of the most urgent national security problems facing the new administration that will take office in January 2009. It is a battle fought mainly in the shadows. It is a battle we are losing. That sounds like pretty dramatic language. Are these histrionics justified?
Well, your delivery was certainly dramatic, Robert.
I tried.
Well, let me tell you, in 2007 already, the Departments of State, Commerce, Homeland Security, the Defense Department, NASA, and the National Defense University suffered major intrusions by foreign entities. These were either foreign intelligence services, militaries, or criminal groups. Today, the Department of Defense computers are probed hundreds, if not thousands of times a day. The Department of State says it has lost terabytes of information. The White House networks have been penetrated, and intelligence sources claim that U.S. companies have lost billions in intellectual property. These activities have continued to increase since then. So there's a great deal of motivation in Washington for the U.S. to become much more robust in addressing these threats, and more importantly, or at least as importantly, in raising the public's awareness of them. There is there's a sense within the broader population when we think of cyber threats, we tend to think of identity theft or pedophilia or something like this. But there's an increasing need to inform the public of the threats from foreign players who many feel are intent on undermining the U.S. economy and its defenses. So here in Washington, we've heard terms like a cyber 9/11 or a cyber tsunami or a cyber Katrina used to describe the potential for damage. Some are even referring to the threat from cyberspace as the soft underbelly of national security.
Okay, so, those sound like pretty serious challenges that no doubt call for some extraordinary measures. What do you see as the most striking provisions of the bill?
Well, the bill is very sweeping in its initiatives. It calls for the establishment of a cabinet-level cybersecurity czar who would be answerable to the president, although we have many of these czars being appointed now for various agencies, so that may not be the most pressing point. But what the bill also seeks to establish is cybersecurity standards that would be mandated across all applicable government and private networks. It would also confer new powers on the President and onto the Secretary of Commerce.
So what are some of these powers? Wait, I understand what? Shutting down, the President has some power to shut down internet traffic?
Here's the problem. Some of the language in the bill is extremely broad and open-ended, and this is causing a lot of concern among civil and digital rights groups. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, for example, and the Center for Democracy and Technology have both raised issues with some of the provisions. You're right, the Act calls for the President to be given the power to shut down internet traffic in emergencies or to disconnect any critical infrastructure systems or networks on the grounds of national security. And the activists are concerned that the Act does not define these so-called emergencies. Therefore, it is left solely up to the President to decide what merits pulling the plug. I don't see as much of a problem with this. It is more analogous in my mind to the President grounding all aircraft on 9/11, and I'm not sure that one could have defined the emergency of 9/11 ahead of time, but this is nevertheless a concern for some. I think more than the powers conferred upon the President, what seems to be disturbing people is that the Secretary of Commerce would be given access to all, quote, relevant data concerning our critical networks. And this is the operable point, without, and I quote again, without regard to any provision of law, regulation, rule, or policy restricting such access. So the privacy advocates fear that this would allow the Commerce Secretary unrestricted access to our private data. Others have even raised the specter of unrelated illegal activity being inadvertently uncovered, and these fear that such evidence could be used against a defendant, for example, thereby undermining his or her constitutional protection against unwarranted searches.